Well, I think that one thing we can all agree on is that we don't envy those people who had to serve on the committee. A lot of us, on both sides of the House, I think, received emails some time ago from 38 degrees, but apparently this was nothing to the number of emails, particularly my Conservative colleagues, received on the Privileges Committee. And one of my colleagues, who is now no longer here, told me he received something like 600 emails. And that really is, Madam Deputy Speaker, completely unacceptable. It is wrong to try and interfere with the Privileges Committee, as it is with the Standards Committee, or indeed any other committee of the House, whether it be the Transport Committee or whether it be, I don't know, the best committee of all, the Committee of Selection, or the Administration Committee. Because that in itself is a breach of privilege. But as other colleagues have said, it's also a breach of privilege not allow members of Parliament to speak out. Part of the argument, I think, being presented in this resolution was that there was some sort of collusion that went on. I know what drove me to make my comments, which I'll go into in more detail, and which I'll read out in full, which the Honourable Lady, the Chairman of the Committee, did not, and I will explain what provoked me to read it very shortly. But the point is that I think much of the comments that have been made by people were spontaneous, were driven by events. And I will explain why, because I see the doubt on the face of the Right Honourable Lady opposite. But before I do, I will give way, of course, to my Right Honourable friend, the Father of the House.
I'm grateful. For those who are following our debate, would my honourable friend agree that on page 11, in the form letter, of which 600 copies were sent to our colleagues on the Privileges Committee, they were implored to protect their own integrity by rejecting this committee, and the proposed letter ended, protect your integrity by resigning from this committee. Can I say that I agree with my honourable friend that those words are unacceptable. They shouldn't have been sent during the hearings of this committee, and other things perhaps should not have been said either in other ways.
I certainly agree that we urge you to take action and protect your integrity by resigning from this committee immediately is completely unacceptable. And incidentally, if I may say, if honourable members receive 600 identical emails, just like that, with hardly any change in the wording, I hope they ended up where I think many of our identical emails end up, and that is in the bin, because that's what it deserves. But this committee was particularly difficult. I think it is fair to say that there is nobody in this land who doesn't have a view, one way or another, about Boris Johnson. I think possibly Margaret Thatcher is the only other person who falls or fell in that category. And it's perfectly human that whether you be a judge in the appeals or Supreme Court, or whether you sit in a quasi-judicial role, you're bound to have these views. But I totally accept that members of the committee will try hard and will often succeed in putting those views in the background while trying to make a fair and decent judgment. So why did I say what I said? And I will read it out in full. Serious questions will need to be asked about the manner in which the investigation was conducted. Unquote. I was talking about procedure. Back to the quote. These were no jurists, as were apparent by the tone of the examination. The question of calibre, malice and prejudice will need to be answered now or by historians. Unquote. And I think it will, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think people will ask these questions. And they might well exonerate the committee. they might well say there was no malice, there was no prejudice, and the calibre was excellent. But I think it was fair to pose that question. But the next question one might ask is, why did I tweet that anyway at that time? Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I attended the hearing when Boris Johnson gave his evidence. I was there for the whole period. And when Boris Johnson gave his evidence, it was in a quasi-judicial role. He had to raise his right hand and he had to swear an oath. And he did. Some of the committee members, and I'm not going to mention and single out any individual committee member because some of them are very close friends of mine. Some of them behaved with absolute dignity and professionalism. But one turned his back on Boris Johnson as he was giving evidence. Another gasped in frustration. Two looked heavenwards as if to accuse him of being a liar. If it were a court of law, and we've heard it isn't, but if it were a court of law, the judge would have called the jury to order. Now, of course, it wasn't a court of law. But, you know, when a witness comes along, swears on the oath, and a group of individuals give judgment, I would call it a court of law. And I simply make the point that justice must not only be done, you know, it has to be seen to be done. And certainly on that day when the evidence was given, and the Honourable Lady, the chairman of the committee, or the past chairman of the committee, just pulled one of her faces just now. You know, it's not in order to do that when you're taking evidence in a quasi-judicial role. And I want to simply suggest this, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think, or Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think that committees which sit in a quasi-judicial role, whether they be the Privileges Committee, the Standards Committee, or indeed hybrid bills committees such as the HS2 Committee, the members of the committee are not all professional lawyers. Many of them are not. And I think there is a very, very strong argument that there should be training about how to take evidence when sitting in a quasi-judicial role. Not just that it be fair, because it could be argued it wasn't fair, but also because, as I said earlier, justice needs to be seen to be done. And I have to say that most journalists who were present, as I was, didn't feel on that day it was seen to be done. Now, the committee may well have come to the right conclusions. I didn't vote against the committee on its original conclusions. I personally thought, actually, it was a little bit vindictive, the sentence, but I certainly wasn't going to vote against the main findings. But it is important that the committee sits in a judicial role and is seen to be acting in a fair and proper way. So, was there collusion with my tweet? In the timing of the tweet? No, there wasn't. It was provoked by the behaviour of the committee when it took evidence from Boris Johnson. And I still stand by the comment I made. Now, I will say that if, because I made that tweet during the hearings, it intimidated in any way any of the members of the committee, and they thought that I had acted to put pressure on them, I apologise.
Thank you.
I don't think for one moment I might say that I think that my honourable friend sitting alongside me here for South Leicestershire was in any way intimidated by the comment that I made. But if I had, I'm using the subjunctive here, not the indicative. If I had, then of course I apologise, because that would have been a breach of privilege, because we shouldn't interfere in the proceedings of any committee.
May I?
I happily give way.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for making the comments he did. Of course, the report, with its annex, the report does highlight the fact that this is a sample of some of the tweets. I noticed that on his own Twitter website there is a tweet from the 31st of July 2022 where he states, Harriet Harman determined to stitch up Boris by changing rules of Privilege Committee, Kangaroo Court. Does he now accept that referring to the Privileges Committee as a kangaroo court is wrong?
Well, now I'm regretting giving way to my honourable friend. I don't remember that tweet, but the answer is actually yes, I do.
Thank you.
But what I would say then, given that opportunity that my honourable friend has now given me, that the Member of Parliament for Rhondda, at least Rhondda, I speak Welsh, Rhondda had the integrity, because of tweets he had made, to stand down. Now, of course, it's fair to say that the House of Commons did approve the Right Honourable Lady's appointment as chair of the committee. But I just wonder whether, on reflection, given the comments she had made publicly in advance, just as the member for Rhondda had done, whether she might have said, no, it's not appropriate for me to stand as well. Look, I think I've now spoken enough, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I believe that the committee attempts to behave with integrity. I think it does behave with integrity. Whether it behaved without having some sort of prejudice beforehand is a moot point. Whether it was able to ignore prejudice beforehand is an interesting question, and one, as I said, historians may well ask in the future.